I was 13, I had my first love. There was nobody that compared to my...
Yeah, you better hide your baby or...
I'm just playing.
You better hide that big-ass forehead.
Together on this plane, and so we literally were on there talking for 2-3 hours of every...
Ludacris was once the thunder of hip-hop, the one who could shake all of Atlanta with just one rap line. When he entered Fast and Furious, he burst onto the screen like a whirlwind of speed, sweeping away every character standing beside him. In the eyes of America, Ludacris is a symbol of recklessness. But the summit is not a place for the faint of heart. A slap backstage. A child raised outside of civilization. A deadly threat. It all coalesced enough to hurl him back into the foul, ragged hole of yesteryear. For years, fans have only seen a decent Ludacris. But what lies behind that mask? What could be cruel enough to break someone who once treated fear as a joke? Who is the one who forced you to live in the shadows, silent like a sinner, without a sentence? And why would an A-list star disappear so inexplicably? The truth behind it is so cold, it makes you not want to trust any of these holy faces in Hollywood anymore. 1. The child carrying the hidden scream. In their spine. Before the whole world called him Ludacris, he was just a kid named Christopher Bridges in Champaign, Illinois. His father works as a night security guard. His mother is a cashier at a supermarket, boring jobs in Illinois. But it's precisely those absolutely normal things that are where tragedy quietly takes root. The Bridges family wasn't the type to stay rooted in one place after their parents' divorce. While many children only had to change classes, Chris had to change cities. From Champaign to Oak Park, then on to Virginia, and finally Atlanta. Every time I move, it's like packing up a box of memories, taping up the faces of friends whose names I haven't even had time to remember yet. And then the cycle repeats again. New friends, different voices around, and the unspoken rules in each neighborhood are also different. It's like being on tour without a return ticket. Even in that turmoil, something began to take shape very clearly. The feeling of always being an outsider. At home, things aren't peaceful either. Later, he spoke frankly about growing up in a household filled with violence and alcohol. The most important man in his life was both the person he loved the most and the person he feared the most. The clinking of bottles arguments that increased in volume, like adjusting the knob on an amplifier, and the feeling that something in the house could explode at any moment. It was in that context that the 9-year-old boy sat down and wrote the first rap line of his life. All I had was lined paper and a ballpoint pen I borrowed temporarily. While others write diaries, Chris writes the first punchline. He didn't have the name Ludacris yet, no label. Just a very clear feeling that when he put words to the rhythm, everything around him suddenly became a little less scary. 3 years later, Chris joined an amateur rap group. The boys gathered, each taking a verse, practicing in the garage living room anywhere, as long as there was a speaker. You might have seen school bands in the US in movies, but Chris's real-life version wasn't as glamorous. No stylist, no luxury cars, just sweat in the sweltering rooms of the Georgian summer and the dream of shining. Alongside this is a quintessential 1990s school life. The quirky, almost bizarre humor that the world would later recognize in Ludacris's music videos actually started with Chris standing among his friends, freestyling, and then throwing in a few jokes that made everyone burst out laughing. Humor back then was a weapon, but also armor. Inside the house, the story of alcohol hasn't stopped yet. The father he loved was still caught in the familiar cycle of many families working, drinking, apologizing, and then drinking again. When he was young, Chris couldn't call it an addiction. There were mornings when he left the house trying to walk as fast as possible, as if he didn't stay within those 4 walls for too long, things wouldn't have time to cling to him. It was precisely that emotional distance that made him cling even more tightly to music. 2. The birth of a warrior. In the late 90s, Chris landed the job that many music lovers dream of. He works at Hot 97.5 in Atlanta. His on-air name is Chris Lova Lova. During the day, he's just an ordinary person. But every time he presses the talk button, he's given a new identity, becoming both a storyteller and a gatekeeper of music. Before the whole country knew Ludacris's rap voice, Atlanta was already familiar with Chris's voice as a DJ. He introduces other people's songs, reads the names of other artists, and promotes other people's shows. Every time he plays a hit, he's on this side of the mixing table, just a few centimeters from the microphone. But the distance to becoming someone with their own song is much greater. Just imagine every night you turn on someone else's music, but your own rap lyrics keep popping into your head. It's like standing outside the stadium knowing you can run faster than some of the people on the field. When not on air, Chris makes the most of every minute at the station to learn more. Learn how songs are chosen for playlists, learn how record labels promote their artists, and learn how hit songs are dissected in terms of rhythm and structure. You're not just a kid who loves rap anymore, you've gotten close to the heart of the system. He dreamed of whether one day someone else would also introduce his name on the air, or if he would forever just be the voice between people's songs. The answer began to arrive when he paid out of pocket to make his first independent album, Incognegro. Without a huge budget or a grand promotional campaign, just a DJ who believed that if he didn't bet on himself. He printed the CDs and sold them from the trunk of his car from one shop to another, from the hands of friends to the audience. This isn't a fairy tale where a major label knocks on your door. On the contrary, you yourself have to go out into the street, hold your product, and find people who want to listen. When Def Jam took notice and reissued Incognegro as Back for the first time, it wasn't just a career leap. That was the moment a local DJ became a code artist. That distance was bridged by sleepless nights, rejected calls, and every time he heard people call him a regional rapper who only belonged in clubs. The first hits came like waves. Southern Hospitality, What's Your Fantasy? And even the verse in those collaborations made his name start to resonate across the country on the radio. But amidst those bursts of laughter, few stopped to wonder why someone who spent their childhood in a house full of tension would choose such an image to present to the world. At an age when many people are still paying off their first car, Ludacris was already bringing in numbers that the 9-year-old rapping boy in his notebook had never dared to dream of. But success is like a stage. Wherever the spotlight shines, the rest is plunged into darkness. Every time he grinned widely at the camera, every time he danced in a scene that looked like a joke, his real story, with fear, with family, with his father struggling outside the spotlight, continued to unfold. 3. The crash began as soon as the lights were brightest. Often people think an artist's tragedy begins when they are past their prime. But for Ludacris, the first setback came at the peak of his career. As Southern Hospitality, Get Back, and Roll Out echoed across America, and the image of the humorous rapper with explosive energy became his brand, the dark side of his life began to surface, unable to be concealed in time. Ever since Chris was a child, his father has been both an inspiration and a source of pain. That was the person who opened the door to music for him, and also the one who carried a wound that lasted for many years. During the years Ludacris was soaring with Atlanta, his father's health issues became more serious. If you've ever witnessed a loved one slowly weakening, while the whole world expects you to be strong, you'll understand how cruel this kind of conflict can be. He still takes the stage with a wide smile and shoots energetic music videos, but between shows he goes home to places where the stage lights can't reach. And then, in 2007, a major chapter in his life closed. The father he loved passed away, just as Ludacris's fame was at its peak. No script can prepare you for this kind of loss. On one side is a world cheering, calling your name, and seeing you as a symbol of the South. On the other side is the hospital bed, the fading breath, and the truth that this time, no doctor, no medicine can save. The pain wasn't in the departure itself, but in the fact that he had to continue living in a world that was applauding, while he knew his heart had just cracked very deeply. True to Ludacris's nature, he doesn't use social media to complain or go to the press to talk about his pain. Instead, he did the only thing he could turn it into music. The song Ocean Skies was written as a letter to a deceased father. Listeners can feel the emptiness, the torment of a man who always has to be strong, but this time doesn't know where to hide his pain. It's no longer the explosive energy of Get Back. This is the sigh of a child. But this is the part that few people talk about. That loss not only hurt Ludacris, it also opened the door to other rifts. When his father died, he began to feel the weight of expectations more clearly. You thought by this point he was already resting easy at the top. Not exactly. His success made others think he was living his dream life. While he struggled with a question many artists have faced was the fun, humorous side that the whole country loved overshadowing his true self. Additionally, people started scrutinizing his personal life more. Every relationship, every personal decision, every child born into imperfect circumstances becomes the subject of outsiders. When his father died, he lost his greatest support, and the world at that time didn't give him a chance to stand still. The show must go on. The contract must be signed, the album must be completed. The most painful thing isn't that you can't stop, but if you stop, the whole system will swallow you up without mercy. Part of Ludacris's tragedy lies here. He had just reached the peak of his career, when back for the first time, and Word of Mouf propelled his name beyond the boundaries of the South. But it was at that very moment that real life snatched away the most important person. External glory is too bright, while the emptiness within is too dark. And he was forced to stand between those two worlds, keeping his signature smile for the audience, while inside him a loss began that could not be repaired. That was the first crack silent, but creating a fissure that would stay with him for a very long time. And from here, the big question was, sewn. Can a man both keep the entertainment world on his shoulders and bear all the family's pain without collapsing? 4. When life gets real, there's nothing left to laugh about. After the loss that shook the very foundation of his life, Ludacris entered a phase where many thought he had grown wings. The album was a bestseller. His name was on the list of America's most commercially successful rappers. Then the doors of Hollywood opened, pulling him into large film sets, where the lights were brighter than any stage he had ever stood on. But it was right here that another kind of tragedy began to take shape. It's not as loud as the loss of a family member, but it's so quiet that you have to live long enough to realize when it started gnawing at you. When Ludacris became Tej in Fast and Furious, the image of the humorous rapper with a touch of flamboyance became an asset for the entire studio. The audience loves him for his cheerful energy, his wide smile, and the liveliness that adds a unique spice to every scene. But here's the paradox. Just as he was loved by the whole world for his humor, he had to keep himself within the mold people wanted. A rapper who used humor to mask his pain suddenly had to live as if that were his true nature. And when the character becomes a mask, you won't know when you've worn it for too long. His film career took him to new heights, but it also took away the time he dedicated to rap. Those who once loved him for his dirty South music began to say he had abandoned his roots, was too busy acting, and was no longer as real as he used to be. At an age when he had just lost his father and had to support a new family, each of those criticisms left another silent wound. Outsiders think artists are very strong, but a simple, "You're not the Ludacris you used to be," can sometimes hurt more than a direct diss track. Not to mention his personal life is scrutinized in every nook and cranny. The lawsuit involves children custody disputes and insinuations that he is not a fully committed family man. Every time news breaks, the audience judges him based on half a headline, with no one knowing about the nights he has to balance two worlds: his duty as a father and the trajectory of a star. Meanwhile, artists who once stood by him either fell from grace or disappeared, making him realize that at some point the Hollywood spotlight would fade before he could even prepare himself. What's even more cruel is that at this stage, Ludacris was making the most money, but this was also when he felt the most disconnected from himself. Great success cannot heal inner cracks. Being in a billion-dollar film series didn't erase the feeling that he was playing a game whose rhythm he no longer clearly understood. And just when the audience thought he was happiest, he was confronted with reality. The more famous he became, the harder it was for him to be honest about what was exhausting him. Because if you just say it, people will think it's the whining of someone who has it all. Ludacris's tragedy at this stage doesn't stem from scandal or failure, but from being forced to live as a cheerful version of himself when real life no longer gives him enough reason to smile. And that's what led to the next dark chapter in his journey, where fame and emptiness began to collide so violently that he could no longer pretend not to hear it. 5. When the truth is revealed. The most painful part of an artist's tragedy isn't when they are attacked, but when they have to sit alone and realize that some things cannot be saved by fame. money, or success. For Ludacris, the truth began to reveal itself, not through scandal, nor through the media storm, but through the very way he slowed down, became more cautious, and more serious. The man who once made America laugh with his punchlines now speaks less, and each time he does, it's laden with a layer of thought. What do you see when you look at the years after Fast and Furious? An artist who has it all, a billion-dollar franchise, family, fame, and respect. But if you look closer at the things he shared in the interview, you'll see a more authentic layer. Ludacris began talking about broken relationships, about having to relearn how to be a father, and about his fear of repeating the mistakes of his late father. He once said, a very straightforward sentence, living longer than his father is the most important goal. The saying sounds simple at first, but if you put it next to the pain of 2007, when he lost his father, just as his career was taking off, you'll understand its significance. And this is the crux of the truth. Ludacris didn't disappear from music because he lost his passion. He stepped back because life placed too many burdens on his shoulders at once. People criticized him for quitting rap, but no one saw the nights he spent recording in silence, no longer as glamorous as before, just words and himself. People talk about his personal life, but no one witnessed the moment he realized he had to put family before fame, especially when he deeply understood the feeling of growing up in a house with many cracks. And the most bitter thing, despite trying to do everything right, he was still drawn into the vortex of expectations and judgment by the system. Rap fans want their hero to be as aggressive and edgy as they used to be. Moviegoers want him to always be cheerful and friendly. No one will let you just be a man trying to mend unfinished parts of your life. The more silent he is, the more misunderstood he becomes. The more he tries to maintain balance, the more outsiders think he's moving away from music. But the truth is, this Ludacris hasn't disappeared. He just doesn't live in a way that makes it easy for others to read him like a character on a screen. He grew up changed and accepted the transition to a phase where his story was no longer just about hits, charts, or roles, but about his journey to protect himself from what once broke his father. In the light of 49 years, the truth revealed is not that he failed or retreated, but rather he's living most authentically, a truth that audiences have to look deeper to fully see. 6. When the last light remains only in memory. There comes a point when even though you haven't announced your departure from the stage, the world can still sense you're slowing down. For Ludacris, that silence wasn't a sign of decline, but rather a moment where the man stepped away from the noise to look directly at the things life forced him to confront. The things he had once avoided, pushed aside to keep running. While the Fast and Furious lights were still on, people thought everything was going smoothly. But few know that this was also the time when Ludacris began to feel the widening gap between his true self and his star life. He's no longer the young man who can rush into the studio after every scene. He became the man who had to be present at home, who had to talk to the children, who had to remain calm during times when the family was as tense as a stretched string. And it was in those ordinary activities that he realized something no one had said. Directly, his father's life was more important than any role on screen. But this maturity didn't come easily. As his children grew up and asked questions, Ludacris could no longer hide in the studio or put his pain into a rap. He had to use true words, explain and accept that he wasn't perfect, something every artist fears. That's when he understood something else to be a good father. You can't remain the scared child you once were. You're forced to grow up even if that growth reminds you of what you once lacked. In recent years, Ludacris has appeared less in music, not because he's lost his passion, but because his priorities have changed. It's no longer a race to prove they're still sharp. It was a journey to rebuild the foundation for his family, a foundation he never had the opportunity to rely on as a child. Parent-teacher meetings, school drop-offs, meals without cameras. All of these things create a version of Ludacris that audiences have never seen, but is the most authentic version. And the irony lies here. When you slow down to protect what you cherish, outsiders think you're going downhill. Someone asked why I don't release as much music as before, why I'm less active online, and why I'm not as loud as I was during the Word of Mouf era. But Ludacris knew well sometimes silence isn't a sign of decline, but a man's way of keeping the most important parts of his life from being swallowed by the game. At nearly 50 years old, Ludacris is no longer seeking the spotlight. He's seeking a balance he never achieved in his youth, peace, slowness, and enough awareness to love things no one applauds. It's not that the music is weakening, and it's not that he's giving up his career. It's that he's entering a phase where he only does things that truly matter, even if the world doesn't see him as clearly as before. And it was precisely that quiet change that revealed a truth no one 3 decades ago would have. That young Chris would achieve sometimes true legacy doesn't lie in making noise, but in living deeply enough that noise is no longer necessary. 7. As the lights fade and the legacy begins to speak. In the end, every story about an artist boils down to a single moment when they stand between the boundary of what has passed and what still lies ahead. Ludacris at 49 is exactly that image, not of a rapper trying to compete with the younger generation, nor of an actor clinging to his glory, but of a man looking directly at the years behind him, with his wounds, his victories, and even the things he hasn't had time to heal. If you look at the surface, you'll see a very stable Ludacris, a film career that continues to be profitable, a large family he cares for wholeheartedly, and community projects he always quietly supports. But beneath that veneer of tranquility lies another story less glamorous, but far more real. This is the stage where he began to rediscover himself. No more exaggerated laughter, no more explosive flow, but a big question. What exactly is the part of him he wants to keep when the lights go out? He doesn't talk much about the past, but every time he opens his mouth, you can clearly hear the shadow of the father who shaped a large part of his life. Every achievement he attains, whether it's a billion-dollar film or a charitable project, bears the mark of a silent promise to live longer, to live better, to live more responsibly. He's trying to do what his father couldn't, and it was that very pressure, the pressure to become a better version of the man who once both frightened and endeared him, that created the deepest layer of tragedy. In music, Ludacris doesn't appear as frequently as before, but every song he chooses to do carries a touch of someone who has lived half a lifetime and understands that success doesn't make up for everything. No big album release, no lengthy promotional campaign, only the verses that appear unexpectedly like a reminder that that person is still there, still has a voice but doesn't need to shout anymore. And this is what makes Ludacris's tragedy so poignant. He has everything. Legacy, money, fame. But at 49, he still feels like he's carrying unfinished parts of his life. It's not because you failed, but because what you've been through is too great to disappear with just time. An unsettled roof, the death of his father, the transition from rapper to actor misunderstandings, and being forced into a mold. All of this still lingers within him like the echo of the 9-year-old boy who wrote his first rap to keep from being swept away. Looking back on that journey, one sees not just a symbol of Southern hip-hop or a Hollywood star. A man is seen living between two worlds, trying to keep everything stable, trying to leave something more beautiful than what he received. And it was at this moment that the most painful question arose. After all the light, the glory, and the success, what was left for Ludacris when it was just him and the unspoken words? The final impression wasn't laughter or iconic music videos. It's the image of a man who has been through too much to remain strong, but has also lost enough to make you wonder, will the fleeting light of glory ever compensate for the parts of his life left in the shadows? 8. As the story concludes and the legacy remains in the hearts of viewers. There are artists whose journey, when you look back on it, you don't first remember for their glitz and glamour. You remember the silences, the places where their hearts cracked, the layers of life they carried, but never named. At 49, Ludacris is one such artist, one for whom after 3 decades in the spotlight, what remains is not the laughter in music videos or the humorous scenes on the big screen,
you know what I mean?
but the cracks that taught him to grow up in ways no one wants. From the boy who constantly moved and used rap to keep himself from fear, to DJ Chris Lova Lova, sitting behind the microphone watching the world change through the studio glass. From the Southern rapper exploding on the radio, to the Hollywood artist entering a billion-dollar franchise. From the son who lost his father just as his career reached its peak, to the father trying to rewrite the family story with a gentler ending. Every step of his journey has two sides, light and darkness. And this is the greatest tragedy Ludacris has achieved more than any child in Atlanta could have ever dreamed of. But the price of that success never leaves him. It's present in every silence, every time he avoids talking about the past, and every rare verse that reveals the fears left by his childhood. People see him as strong, see him as wealthy, see him standing in the middle of Hollywood, but they forget that behind that image is a man who had to sacrifice so much to find where he belonged. But it's also here that Ludacris leaves behind his most beautiful quality, perseverance.
Erica stuck up in the world on her
Not losing quality under the pressure of the system. Don't lose your kindness just because the world always wants you to be happy, humorous, and full of energy. He stood firm.
You know, when I got
not
to the
as an
radio
immortal
station, like
icon
you
of
say,
hip-hop, but as a man who chose to live authentically even though that truth was sometimes suffocatingly heavy. At the age of 49, Ludacris no longer needs applause to prove anything.
Oh, we can do it on stage
What
with
he
the
left
Ludacris
behind
concert.
wasn't entirely in his hit songs or box office revenue, but in the question, he forced the audience to consider, is the light of glory worth sacrificing the deep, unseen
50-yard line,
parts
why the
of
dirty
one's
bird kick
life?
the tree. And if you like it in
That's
the
why his story is so heartbreaking. It's not because you failed, but because you succeeded in a way that many admire, yet were lonely in a way that everyone fears.
That's where I write my
Ludacris
music, in the
enters
car.
his
That's where I write
49th
my
year
best
not as a
music.
fading star, but as a man reflecting on his life and understanding that the most precious thing he has is not the spotlight that once shone on him, but his ability
my first
to
song
rise
was
from
called
the
I'm Cool,
shadows
I'm
that
Bad, I Might Be.
success cannot erase. And if there's a conclusion to this story, it's probably simply Ludacris isn't going anywhere. He's just being more real. And it's that very truth that's the legacy that touches viewers the longest,
hit by
deepest,
guitar.
and
Just
most
okay
painfully.
to act.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore. Stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.